Like a concrete pillar cracking under invisible weight, Pakistan's state apparatus is buckling from within. The country is entering a rapid internal collapse. These crowds reveal the immense scale of the civilian protests currently tearing through the country. Public hostility toward the leadership has fractured the nation's stability. Army Chief Asim Munir oversees the current strategy. However, the military establishment is losing the absolute grip it held over the Pakistani public for generations. In the past, Islamabad might have looked to its western border for regional allies to stabilize the situation. But Iran has explicitly stated they no longer trust Pakistan. Tehran's distrust stems from a very specific accusation. They claim Islamabad allowed the US to use Pakistani airspace and maritime facilities, like the Gwadar port seen here, to facilitate strikes against Iranian cities. Iran delivered a public and explicit ultimatum, showcasing heavy missile systems like these. If Pakistan makes a hostile misstep, Tehran promises immediate strikes on Islamabad. Boxed in by an angry populace at home and a hostile Iranian military to the west, the military leadership is theorizing a desperate pivot east, provoking a localized border conflict with India. The goal is to trigger what is known as force majeure. This is a legal and political state of emergency caused by an unforeseen crisis that cancels domestic obligations. A sudden conflict with India would theoretically force the fractured country to stop protesting and rally behind the army. To save his own political regime, Munir is willing to risk a war, but he is severely misjudging the scale of the retaliation heading his way. Pakistan's plan relies entirely on the assumption of a localized, manageable conflict. That is a fatal error, because India's military doctrine has heavily updated its strike capabilities. This map of Pakistani airspace shows their vulnerability. The defensive grid is full of holes because key Chinese systems were destroyed. Even newly acquired American radars remain unintegrated. Connecting these isolated nodes takes over a year, leaving their sky unprotected right now. While Pakistan struggles to rebuild its defense, India's offensive strike capability has quietly doubled in range without needing to purchase new hardware. Take a look at India's BrahMos mobile system. Through a rapid software update, the military converted these cruise missiles into an 800-kilometer long-range threat. That offensive advantage is compounded by the final integration of S-400 defensive systems on these heavy transport vehicles. Once active, India creates total airspace dominance. But India's primary retaliation won't be a land invasion. The main theater of war will shift to the Arabian Sea, with a suffocating naval blockade. India's strategy relies on deploying overwhelming naval assets, like the advanced destroyer seen here, to form an impenetrable wall directly off Pakistan's coast. This forces Pakistan into a military catch-22. Do nothing and allow the blockade to starve them, or attempt to break the line by firing outdated anti-ship missiles. If they choose to fire, these vertical launch cells on India's Barak cruise missile interceptors are already positioned to instantly neutralize the attack. Any provocation by Islamabad guarantees the systematic, completely unopposed destruction of their entire coastal military infrastructure. A naval blockade strikes at the nation's absolute survival, immediately severing Pakistan's logistical heart. Look at the massive infrastructure of the Karachi and Qasim port complex. Nearly 100% of the nation's oil enters through these specific choke points. This flowchart maps their fragile supply chain. Fuel arrives at coastal storage tanks, moves to refineries, and branches across the map. If India strikes those centralized port capacities, that continuous flow stops completely at the coast. Without the Karachi choke point feeding the country, Pakistan's entire national reserve of petrol and diesel drops to zero in roughly 1 week. Civilian supply chains freeze. The economy halts entirely. Even their own military vehicles are rendered entirely useless. Zoom out to the macro geopolitical reality. Pakistan would no longer be fighting a one-front war with India. They would be completely surrounded by 5 hostile fronts, with no fuel to defend themselves. By attempting a desperate tactical provocation merely to save a failing political regime, the military establishment will guarantee the total economic and logistical collapse of Pakistan.